Hey cards, Dawn Stewart here. I'm back to talk a little bit about the NCAA forms that you're going to need to complete today. They should all be listed in front of you, but the first one that I want you to start with is the D3 Summary of Regulations. This summary is a summary of all of the rules that you as a student athlete need to be in the know on as you're navigating your year of practice and competition. There are several rules. I encourage you to take the time to browse through it or potentially come back to it if in fact you have specific questions. But there are two areas today that I want to briefly talk about, which typically are the frequently asked areas when it comes to, or coming from student athletes. The first is really around academic standards and what does it take for a student athlete to be eligible for practice and competition. The golden rule to this, first and foremost, is to be enrolled in a full-time class load here at Otterbein. And at Otterbein, that is 12 credit hours. So you want to make sure that you're enrolled in those 12 credit hours. There are some student athletes who could be enrolled in less than 12, and typically those are our seniors who are in their last semester of eligibility. They are usually the only ones that are permitted to be less than full-time. And seniors, if you find yourself in that circumstance, please make sure that you come to your coach or me ahead of time so that we can make sure that you have completed all of your course requirements and that you are in fact permitted to be enrolled in less than full-time. Otherwise, you need to make sure that you're in good academic standing, which means that you're keeping your grades up, that you're working with your faculty members to pursue good academic standing and make sure that you're doing everything that you can to attend class. And once again, just do all of the right things by maintaining your academic standards. The second area that I get frequent questions on is really around amateurism. In amateurism, the whole idea behind amateurism is making sure that you as a student athlete are in fact remaining an amateur, that you're not receiving compensation or any other kind of benefits for your athletics participation. And while we know that that's not a problem or an issue here at Otterbein, typically where I ask our student athletes to keep an eye on this or their ear to the ground on this is in respect to maybe times of the year where they're competing in or on teams outside of their Otterbein athletic teams. Typically in the summer when we have maybe our baseball or softball student athletes play on summer teams, maybe our golf or tennis or any of our other individual sport athletes maybe participating in a tournament or other competition. Even our seniors, our juniors and seniors can sometimes be asked to play in all-star competitions. If in fact any of those opportunities come up for you, most often or more often than not, those are opportunities that you can pursue, but we should always talk about them. You should be in contact with your coach or with me in regards to those opportunities, because if in fact you're offered a small stipend or housing or equipment or other items, some of that could also be seen as compensation. And we want to make sure that, that those items are okay for you to receive and not compromising your eligibility here at Otterbein in order to practice or compete. We're going to shift gears now. We're going to talk about two other forms. The next form actually is only for our international students. So once again, only for our international students, it's the General Amateurism and Eligibility form. And for our international students to complete that, there's a complete history needed for previous participation in sports back in your home country. So I encourage you to take a deep read of that. If you have any questions about that form, by all means, feel free to reach out to me and we can help you complete that. For all other student athletes, all of our domestic student athletes, the next form I want you to take a look at is the Student Athlete Statement. And this walks through a variety of different things, and you're going to be checking boxes here and there. Used to be signatures on this specific form, now you're checking some boxes. So upperclassmen who've completed this before, once again, please read it thoroughly and make sure that you're checking the appropriate boxes. The first section really starts off by making sure that you've been provided with a copy of the NCAA regulations, which we just did, that you're acknowledging that those regulations, that you're acknowledging those regulations and that you meet the requirements to participate, and just understanding that any false statement or falsifying of any of these documents would result in an NCAA violation. That's the first section. The second section really talks about FERPA and HIPAA, which protect your educational records as well as your medical records. And what the NCAA is asking there is if you're comfortable signing off or giving them access to both your educational records and or your medical records. Typically when they need this information is when they want to write a story or when they want to promote you somehow. Maybe they want to promote how well you're doing in the classroom, or if you've faced a medical hardship, how you've overcome that hardship. This is typically when they would need that, and they would also, in those situations, contact us first. But this is why they ask for those approvals. So it's up to you as to what level of access you would like to give them, but you can in fact elect to do that, and once again, there are some boxes for you to check. The next section talks about amateurism. And once again, as we just discussed, amateurism, making sure that we've protected or you've protected your right to remain an amateur in the NCAA competitive system, our system, for practice and competition. So you'll want to check a few boxes there and ultimately make sure that you have preserved your amateurism for the sake of participating at Otterbein. The next section talks about NCAA drug testing. We're going to talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, where you actually give your drug testing consent. But basically, it's asking you a little bit as to if you've ever tested positive for a drug test or negative, and you'll want to indicate that. And if you have tested positive, I believe they ask you for a little bit more information in terms of when that positive test occurred. The last section of this form speaks to sport wagering and whether or not that is something that a behavior that you've participated in. So you will want to make sure that you indicate that on the form and take it from there. Lastly on this form will be the academic section, where you will indicate if you have any academic violations or any other violations. At the bottom of this form, you will sign and date, and that will be the completion of this form. The last form that we'll be asking you to look at today will be the drug testing consent form. So on your list of forms, it will come up as drug testing consent. Upperclassmen, you have filled this document out before. Underclassmen, this may look new to you. First and foremost, at the very bottom of this form, if you scroll down, is a list of all of the banned substances that the NCAA provides to you or provides or that would trigger a positive drug test. So you want to make sure that you review that. Upperclassmen, and our freshmen, you need to know as well. What I always encourage you to do is make sure that if you're taking any supplements or drinking any protein shakes or, grabbing something from GNC or another nutrition store, you want to make sure that you're disclosing that to our athletic trainers and making sure that they're in the know on what you're putting in your body. Because the last thing you want to do is, if you're selected for a drug test positive inadvertently or by accident, with the idea that you think that you're doing something to benefit your body, when in fact it could trigger a positive drug test. When you scroll through this form and ask for your name and your sport, it'll ask you for your consent, for their consent to drug test. This is for NCAA drug testing, once again. Typically, the NCAA, if they're going to perform drug testing, will do it at the end of the season and a post-season tournament situation. You will sign and date, giving them the permission to drug test. They ask you for your birth date, your home address. We ask you to use your permanent address in that situation. And then that is the end of that form. So that should take care of your NCAA forms. I'll be back in just a minute to talk a little bit about the Otterbein student-athlete forms that you need to complete.